In the beginning was the forest. Along the seaboard in small expeditions, they began to arrive from Europe. Over a span of 300 years, they moved on westward, all the way to the other ocean. In certain regions of the country, over the long period, there grew up local concentrations of people, business, activity. These became the metropolitan areas, the major urban regions, the most densely settled parts of America. There's the Atlantic region, megalopolis, stretching from Boston to Washington, 40 million people. There's the Great Lakes region, centered on Chicago, 30 millions. The Pacific region of California, 16 millions. Back on the Atlantic side, the Florida region, 5 millions. In the heartland, the Ohio region, another 5 millions. And the southern Piedmont urban region, centering on the Carolinas, again 5 millions. Each of these zones is an area of dense population, human activity, and growth. Each of them faces a future full of promise, full of problems, on a major scale. The state of North Carolina consists of 3 well-defined physical areas. The mountain region is cool and forested, part of the long Appalachian chain. Some mountain settlements date back to the days of Daniel Boone. The coastal plain and Outer Banks region along the Atlantic shore. Many waterways, marshes, and inlets laced among the farmlands. The first settlements in the state were built here, the early plantations. Between the coastal region and the mountains, the Piedmont Plateau, low hills, red fertile soil, a mixed economy. Into this region, waves of settlers moved from north and south, independent-minded people of various stocks and strains, seeking land, sharing the characteristic problems and ambitions of America. The coastal streams and rivers opened the way to settlements from the sea, but made travel difficult along the shoreline. The mountains restricted travel to the west. The major routes for travel and freight developed inland through the Piedmont. People and goods moving over a century ago between the plantations of the south and the growing industries of the north. As always, the easy routes for travel determined where the growing points of settlement would be. Indian trails, crossing places, local roads, main roads, set the pattern for movement and growth. Nowadays, this movement is a steady flow, by day and night, unceasing. Thousands of tons of goods at any moment are streaming through the Piedmont region. Each system of movement supports the other. When the railways were built to service new communities, factories and towns sprang up along the right-of-way. And now an immense volume of freight moves into and through the Piedmont region by rail. The channels of communication, moving mostly north and south. With the air age, easier travel across the state, over the mountains to mid-America and the west. Towns that were already well established became junction points and centers for air travel. Commercial airlines, both national and local, and a host of privately owned aircraft, enabled easy access to all parts of the state. As population began to center on the towns, communications media began to link the towns together. Newspapers were first. Then radio stations increased the speed of news and information. Then television, strengthening still more the central influence of the towns. Over the past century, as the towns grew, so did the systems for bringing fuel and energy to stoke their industries. A pattern of electric power stations throughout the state. Pipelines for natural gas. Pipelines for petroleum. Fuel oil for homes and factories. Where the main travel routes intersected, cities grew rapidly. They became centers for wholesale and retail trade. Centers also for manufacture. Cities like Charlotte, Greensboro, Winston-Salem attract new industry because they provide resources, new markets, workers and services for industry. Everything grows together. 2/3 of the state's manufacturing employment is concentrated in the Piedmont. Today, over 5 million people live within the 100 counties of North Carolina. The major population lives in the central Piedmont region. Most of the larger towns and cities are in this region. Within this area, 11 counties form a heavily urbanized region called the Piedmont Crescent. And here the interplay of business, movement, and people is a powerful, dynamic process. 150,000 people in 1850. Thereafter, decade by decade, steady growth throughout the 11 counties of the Piedmont, in Gaston and Mecklenburg, in Cabarrus and Rowan, in Davidson, Forsyth, and Guilford, in Alamance and Orange, in Durham and Wake. 1.5 million people in 1960. First it was Salem and the Moravians. Raleigh, the capital. Chapel Hill. Forests turned to farms and towns. The years of war between the states, the many dead. Duke and tobacco. Piedmont industry with Duke and Reynolds. Grander buildings. And cotton coming in from the farms. The friendly, easygoing life of small towns. The family album of the past. Sodas and sociables. Greensboro's Centennial Parade. Cotton. 30,000 in cotton mills by 1900. The legislature finally outgrew its old home. In 1963, rehoused in a growing city. Cities now pushing out into the farmlands. Farming still at the base of Piedmont life, but less so. Now it's not just tobacco and cotton, but agribusiness. Processing and new production. New skills. Furniture, a major industry since the 1880s. Special efforts to promote research in industry. New kinds of industry moving to the Piedmont. But always near at hand, the pleasures of the woods and farmlands. Nowadays, an urge for speed. The growth of population, decade by decade, followed the roads. Forest trails to cart tracks, to gravel roads, to paved highways. People followed the roads. And when there were enough people, they built more roads. And new people came along the new roads and settled in the Piedmont. Over 100 years, decade by decade, the gradual spread of the network of roads, the economic bloodstream of the region. From the early days, a vigorous policy of road building. Early congestion, Raleigh to Durham. Before 1850, a railway carried building stone to Raleigh. Then construction of the North Carolina Railroad brought about the economic growth of the Piedmont. The crescent-shaped course between Raleigh and Charlotte set up a geographic pattern of industrial and urban growth, which has lasted to the present day. The great time of railway building was late in the last century. At that time, the railway pattern of the Piedmont took shape. The public schools, and later the colleges, followed the spread of new settlements through the region. The schools grew slowly in the first part of the century. In later decades, the rate of building increased sharply. Like other services, the schools followed the pattern of the towns. The larger school units and the colleges consolidated in the larger centers of population. With colleges and universities and growing cities, an urge towards the arts. Population means people and their activities. The people, the activities are increasing. The towns and cities are reaching out and touching. A stream of movement connects them all through the Piedmont Crescent. But the larger numbers and growing industries don't add up to a perfect picture. There are problems. The one you see most easily is housing. Bad housing. Outmoded, unfit, unacceptable. How do we deal with it? The reaching out of cities brings other problems. Who should be responsible for the no man's land along the highways, where towns extend themselves and blur together? Who should build? And who should not? And who should decide? In the bird's eye view, towns and cities sprawl along the ribbon roads without pattern. Despite these problems, history has been kind to the Piedmont Crescent. The land and climate are well favored. People have moved here freely and prospered, and their numbers have sharply increased. What now? Suppose the same rate of population growth continues after 1960. What will that do for us by the end of this century? Here's the picture. Estimated population of the Piedmont Crescent by the end of this century will be over 3 million people. Building goes on everywhere these days. Old landmarks come down. New ones go up. The streets are changed. The schools overflow, and pressure still increases. The largest schools are overburdened, and many more to come. Consider the highways. Suppose that highways grow at the same rate as now until the year 2000. What will the pattern be? What will traffic be like? Who will make decisions about routes and costs. Today, some 700,000 cars are on the roads of the Piedmont Crescent. By the end of the century, about 2 million vehicles are estimated in this same region. What comes next? We know what's happened. How do we prepare for the next stage? Growth is inevitable. It can mean prosperity, new investment, and employment. It can also mean other things: less space and leisure, less comfort and peace of mind. It can mean duplication, waste, congestion. The prosperous condition of the Piedmont is due to many things, but mainly it is due to decisions. Decisions made over the years by local and state governments, public decisions, and decisions made by individuals, business and industry, private decisions. All these decisions, public and private, taken together, determine the kind of environment we live in. But mostly, the big decisions are made by local government, made in the public sector: highways and schools, water supply, disposal of wastes and sewage, municipal housekeeping. In the past, most of the decisions made by local government were their own affair. Local, self-centered, without regard to the surrounding region. But now the towns are growing, merging together. Strictly local needs that used to be simple now become complex regional problems involving whole groups of cities and counties. Problems such as regional water supply, regional systems for transportation and for education. Other regional problems may be less apparent on the surface, but they matter in the long run just as much. The nature of the air we breathe, the beauty of the countryside, space for recreation, open space between the cities, space that has meaning and value for the quality of our environment. As our numbers grow, we see that the single city or county government can no longer handle by itself the complicated problems of a region. Finance and management become too complex to go it alone. The old pattern of making local, independent, self-centered decisions no longer works. We need a new approach. How does each small community relate itself to the growing region all around it? The answers aren't ready-made. There's no book of rules. We only know that we can't leave it all to chance. In future, the quality of growth in the Piedmont region will depend on how well that growth is planned. This means many things. A new kind of partnership between state and local governments. A working partnership between the public and the private sectors. Between government on the one hand, business and industry on the other. New planning machinery where it's needed. More beef and more ideas in our planning organizations. Above all, some changes in our attitudes and understanding about growth. The beginning is to understand what's happening here and now. Then our goals become clearer. Then we can discover the ways and means to harness our restless growth and preserve the special quality of this rich region. We'll need to try some new experiments in our towns and cities, new ideas about planning and management. We'll have to recognize how much our affairs are interrelated, our jobs and programs, between one community and the next, throughout an entire region. We don't have all the answers, but we are getting a better picture of the problems. As the goals and targets become clear, we need to take action, thoughtfully and with purpose. Without such action, there's a risk of chaos in the future. With it, there's hope that we'll achieve the fullest quality of living in this growing urban region of the Piedmont.